podcast of the Emergency Podcast System. Had this been a real podcast, you would leave edified and entertained.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Emergency Podcast System. I'm your host, Pete Cantillon. You know, it's been a few weeks. We've taken a bit of a break because there's only so much content one can create. But today, we've got an episode that was triggered by an event. The Queen is dead. As of September 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of England and the Commonwealth, passed away at her residence in Balmoral, Scotland. And the world is absorbing the loss of a monarch who reigned for more than 70 years. The second longest reigning monarch in the world, longest reigning British monarch. And it can be confusing, I think, for a lot of people who are not connected with the monarchy in some way or another, to understand what is going on in terms of the outpouring of emotion and grief and, a whole slew of different reactions around the world. For people like me who grew up in the Commonwealth, Queen Elizabeth represented something constant, a single presence that never changed through a rapidly changing and chaotic world. For at least, again, the past 70 plus years of her reign. My entire life and the entire lives of billions of people around the world. As a Canadian citizen, Queen Elizabeth's image was ever present in our lives, whether we wanted it to be or not. She is on our currency, every single element of our currency, coinage and paper, or plastic now, I guess. She is in framed photographs and paintings in official government offices around the world. You have to remember, Queen Elizabeth II was the head of state in Canada. And then it can be difficult again for people to remember that even though we are a parliamentary democracy, that parliamentary portion means that Queen Elizabeth, through the Governor General, is the head of state in our country and assents in various ways to proclamations and acts that are passed by Parliament. So she is woven into the fabric of what it means to govern and be Canadian, whether you like it or not. And that's the part that I think is confusing for some people. Those who are not a member of the Commonwealth. Many of my peers who are and have been their whole lives and may have questions about the value of the monarchy, they're legitimate questions, about the amount of money and complexity in terms of infrastructure that it takes a country like Canada to sustain its role in the Commonwealth and to sustain and maintain a monarchy that seems to be a relic. These are all legitimate things. And of course it creates a sense of confusion and weirdness when someone like Queen Elizabeth II dies. You know, at 96 years old, there comes a point in the lives of many people where you stop wondering if she's going to die. I mean, you knew she was going to die, but then there's a part of you that just thinks that she'll always be there. Because she's always been there. And so, there's a bit of a myth that grows up around the individual that many people are now struggling to come to terms with as we grapple with the reality that she has died. At a very human level, it's ridiculous because she's no different than anyone else. She is a human being who was, through birth and chance, attained to a title and a role that the rest of us cannot understand and comprehend. Some of us can envy it and look at the wealth and the privilege. And there are others who see the amount of effort she clearly put into the role, a role that she chose never to retire from, a role that she chose to function in and work in for more than 70 years. So there's a work ethic there that one can only admire. But at the same time, it's a confusing time for people. I want to address some things that aren't being addressed right now or are largely being ignored. Throughout social media, predominantly social media, there are voices that are lifting up and celebrating, in some sense or another, the passing of this queen. There is a certain level of mockery. There is satire. There is outright joy, and one needs to understand where that comes from. In Canada, and throughout the world, I only use Canada as an example, but Canada, Australia, Pakistan, India, Israel, and Palestine, the evidence of England and its colonial past and the ramifications and reverberations through time of those colonial decisions continue to impact the lives of millions of people, tens of millions of people, particularly people who are of indigenous heritage. I think we need to remember, and I believe the Queen would have agreed with this, that the Queen was also a symbol, if not first and foremost, a symbol of England and the Commonwealth, a symbol of everything that England is, and a symbol of power and authority, a symbol of the people of the Commonwealth, and the crown that goes with it, also a powerful symbol. In Canada, in the court system, when somebody is engaged in the criminal system, they are often engaged with the crown. It is so-and-so versus the crown. The crown is everywhere. There is crown land, which is governed by or overseen by our government. And so the symbol of the crown is not a passive symbol. It is a symbol that Elizabeth II represented, and she would admit this, and it is a symbol that brings to light much pain in the lives of a lot of people around the world. When you look at the division of Pakistan from India after England left, this is a moment of great pain that continues to reverberate through the lives of Indians and Pakistanis around the world and affected the relations between those two countries to this day. That pain is a direct result of colonial decisions, and those colonial decisions are represented by and very visibly seen as the crown. And the representative of that crown that divided that country is Queen Elizabeth II. The same goes for our indigenous peoples in Canada, who suffered enormously as a result of the colonial decisions of England. And to this day and beyond, that suffering continues and will continue in the lives generations past and continuing forward. This is something that cannot be ignored. And so when we see words that we think are inappropriate, or people mocking or celebrating as a result of their own history with the crown, remember the colonial power it represents. Remember the pain that it represents. Because it's a legitimate response. They see something passing, something that they see, and it truly represents pain and suffering of colonialism in their lives. So, for the rest of us who don't have that history, who aren't as directly affected by that history, or have forgotten it, or have chosen to ignore it, or deny it, it's important to remember that we don't all see people the same way. We don't all see what they represent the same way. And again, I need to stress, and I'm sure, I'm fairly certain that Elizabeth II would have agreed. First and foremost, the Queen is the symbol of the Commonwealth and the power that it represents, and the wealth that it represents, and the people and the history that it represents. And the crown that monarch wears is a symbol throughout the world of many, many things. First and foremost, amongst the indigenous peoples of the world who happen to have encountered England in its colonial era, it represents pain and suffering and ongoing destruction of culture. And so, again, very important to take this into account when seeing reactions that you may not like. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to be, please don't think that, in some patronizing way, I'm suggesting that the white colonizing descendant Canadians and others throughout the Commonwealth should forbear with our indigenous peers, because that's ridiculous. They don't need our permission to say or do or act in any way. I'm speaking mostly to the audience of people who would maybe be offended by some of the reactions, and remind them that those reactions are legitimate. I'm not seeking to legitimize those reactions. They don't need any legitimacy from me. They'll continue regardless of what I say here. What I am saying, again, is to offer some clarity for people. Death, in all its various forms, has a different effect on different people, depending upon who the person is that passed away, what they represented, and what they symbolized. And so the responses that we're seeing are legitimate, whether you like them or not, whether I like them or not. At the end of the day, for me, it's complicated. I have family members who are, my sister has indigenous heritage, and my stepfather, who I called Dad when I was younger, was indigenous, and his life represented and symbolized much of the suffering that is a direct result of the colonizing history of this country, the colonizing history at the hands of England. And so it's complicated, and I see that, and certainly, I have many members in my family who respected the monarchy, respected Queen Elizabeth. I don't think most people put a great deal of thought into it. I'm overthinking it probably a little bit right now. What most people saw was a person, a woman, who seemed to project strength and stability through an increasingly unstable world over a great deal of time, and became something that many people envied, and more importantly, that many people admired, because she seemed to have many of the attributes that we strive to. Steadfastness in her work, some compassion, an ability to maintain strength through adversity, to lead, and to lead by example. These are things that many people can admire in any person. But again, not everybody felt that way. There are many who would have wished that she could have stepped outside of the what appears to be a cone of unemotionality in her role as queen and crown, to address more forcefully and thoroughly the history of colonization and the impact it had on the peoples of the world. She could have done that. She had the authority to do that. Only she could speak in a loud voice about the colonizing history of her ancestors, who were monarchs and leaders in England. I think that she didn't do that, and that angers a lot of people, and now she'll never do that. And who knows? Maybe King Charles III will address those issues. Maybe it will be William. It's difficult to say. The Crown has never really thoroughly or authentically addressed issues of colonization and the impact it's had on indigenous peoples around the world. And so that's a legit beef, and it should be recognized as such. You know, it's going to be an interesting time. For me personally, my mom was definitely a follower of the monarchy. Members of my family have been followers. I wouldn't suggest we were monarchists. That requires a little deeper level of commitment to the idea. And I haven't put a great deal of thought to it, frankly. As a young man, when I swore an oath, having joined the military as a member of the 11th Field Regiment Artillery Reserves, I swore an oath not to Canada. I swore an oath to the Queen. And I have that oath printed out in my files still. This is the depth to which the monarchy is embedded in our country and in our psyche, and it's complicated, and it will remain complicated for a long time to come. There is one truth. Elizabeth II has died after more than 70 years reigning at the age of 96 years old. And we have, in that sense, lost a symbol of stability, a symbol of constancy that many people have only known. And now we move into another era of uncertainty. When you lose your constants like that, your temporal milestones, it can shake you. And it sounds ridiculous because at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of people in a bunch of roles that we created and made up for ourselves, including the Queen and now the King. And we are all equal inherently at birth, and then separated through various social structures that we've created for ourselves and classified, etc. It seems silly, and yet that is the way it is. We need these things that we create for ourselves, and we will change them and adapt them and discard them in time. But for the time being, people will feel loss, and some will feel celebratory because this is a symbol that is passed. And so we'll all deal with it in different ways. Anyhow, that's been the Emergency Podcast System. Thanks for listening. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming.